Hi, I'm Sarah Land, mainly now known as Heidi's mum, and I also run Peeps, the HIE charity. So thank you for inviting me along to share a little bit about Heidi, me, and HIE, and our experience through cooling. So this was me pre-Heidi, where life was very different. Heidi's our only child. It was a very uneventful pregnancy, and I was induced at 41 weeks with no indication that things could go wrong. Heidi experienced a sudden, unexpected postnatal collapse during skin to skin within the first hour of being born, and that was when our world changed really quickly and dramatically. She had to be resuscitated and was prepared to be transferred to Oldham, which is our local level 3 unit for cooling, and we saw her briefly before that happened. I remember being told that Heidi was going to be cooled, and I had no idea what that meant. I didn't have a medical background, and I couldn't understand why a baby would be cooled. Surely you want to keep babies safe and warm. But I now understand the reasons and the benefits behind it. And clearly it was absolutely the best thing for Heidi. But at the time it just didn't register what that meant for her. This was Heidi as she was being cooled, so just a couple of days old. And when we arrived at the neonatal unit, I didn't know what to expect. We hadn't been in hospitals before. We hadn't prepared for this. We didn't know it was going to happen. And I still talk about the chin wobble that I felt when we first entered the unit to meet Heidi. It was really overwhelming. But all the staff were so lovely. They really looked after us. Heidi was being cooled. She was hooked up all to the monitors, and the sounds and the smells of that are still really clear now, and yeah, that kind of brings a lot of emotions back. And obviously for those first few days I couldn't hold her, and I felt really lost, and it felt kind of unnatural as a mum that I couldn't give Heidi a cuddle, and we had to leave Heidi at the unit and drive home for those first couple of days before we had a place in the parents' room and come home to an empty house and have an empty car seat. And there were lots of uncertainties, the kind of what if, and we just wanted to know what the future looked like. We also were encouraged to be involved in Heidi's cares, even as she was being cooled, and to talk to her, to gently touch her, and just to reassure her, and in turn that reassured us as well. I've put this slide in because I felt that there's lots of emotions while you're in neonatal and while Heidi was being cooled. I felt lost as a mum because I couldn't do things, or I felt I couldn't do things, and I was scared. I was scared about the future. I was scared about Heidi being okay. I was scared about me and Steve, my husband, being okay. Clearly I was really upset. This wasn't what anyone had planned, and I'd had to kind of ring my mum and tell my mum that we'd had a baby but she was really poorly, tell family and friends, and trying to explain things to them when I didn't fully understand it myself was really difficult. Of course we were tired, all new parents are tired, but with the additional worry of having a poorly baby and not fully understanding what it meant, made things even harder. And we felt really quite lost in those early days. I think there was an element of shock and fear. We felt isolated. We were cut off from the outside world while we're in that safety bubble of NICU. And I appreciate that will have been very different as well recently for families with COVID restrictions. I also felt guilty that Heidi was here, but I was grieving. I felt like we'd lost the child that we'd hoped to have had, and the experience. We'd missed out on those first few days where things are meant to be absolutely perfect, and they absolutely weren't for us. And I felt judged, and I really wasn't. I know I wasn't judged, but I felt that I'd be questioned if I left the unit, or if I did something wrong. And it really took the reassurance of the nurses to encourage us to kind of go home and have a sleep, have a shower, look after ourselves. We couldn't be with Heidi 24/7, and she was having the best care. But that again was really hard for us because there were lots of mixed emotions. But at the same time, there were lots of positives as well. So there was lots of love for Heidi and around us, from people on the unit and from family and friends sending us messages. We felt really proud because she was fighting a battle, and she was doing as well as she could do. We felt hopeful for the future, and that's something that we had to hold on to, and we still do hold on to hope. And we felt really grateful that Heidi had been able to be cooled within the specified window, that the equipment was available, that the trained staff were available, and that she was receiving the absolute best treatment. And we were really thankful as well for how well we were being looked after. Heidi clearly was the priority, but us as a family as well were really well looked after. And we had reassurances from healthcare professionals that she was in the best place, that she was doing well, and that people were doing absolutely everything they could to look after our girl. And I think at times where people didn't know what to say to us, we felt held. And sometimes that's all people can do for families, is to hold space and think of them and be there if or when they need them. And we had, we tried to be positive. And even if we were looking at the tiniest improvements, and we always say we look for inch stones rather than milestones, then we would take the positives where we could find them. It was a really difficult time because I had lots of questions and I was scared to ask them. I think the biggest one early on was Heidi going to live? And I didn't want to ask it because I was too scared of the answer. And I now know with HIE just how people don't have that crystal ball. They can't predict the future and they can't give false hope. But it's about, I guess, being realistic but holding on to some hope where you can. So this wasn't in my antenatal classes. No one told me about HIE. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know that things could go so seriously wrong, especially in a full-term baby. And none of this obviously was planned, but we had to get through it, and families do, and you do your best. And these are just some of the things that I guess I would have taken for granted before having Heidi. So the first cuddle, that's a picture of us having a very early cuddle. Once she'd gone through the cooling process, she was still hooked up to the machines. There was lots of wires, fully tube fed, lots of things going on. And it took a lot of planning from the nurses, and I was absolutely terrified at the idea of holding Heidi, because even though she was the biggest baby in NICU at the time, I think she seemed really fragile still. But the nurses made it as special as they could for us, and I'll always be so thankful for that. The middle picture is the first time that I managed to express, and it was a few mils, and it was amazing because the nurses had encouraged me and shown me. We had knitted boobs to talk about what to do, and even if it wasn't enough to give Heidi's nutrition, they would use it and to help us with mouth cares and things like that. And again, that was really important for me as a mum and for us as a family, because it felt that I could do something. And no matter how little I expressed, I was always welcomed back at the unit with the biggest well dones, which really did mean a lot, and the encouragement helped. And the flowers, this was the first bunch of flowers we got after we'd had Heidi. So when we first went home, it was to an empty house, and it all felt really quite sad because Heidi was still on the unit. We didn't have cards or flowers or balloons or things that you would expect, because friends and families were just too scared to say or do the wrong thing. And it's not because they didn't care, they just didn't know what the right thing was. But it was actually the teams on the unit who kind of normalised a difficult situation, and they congratulated us on having Heidi and said that she was beautiful and all the nice things, even though there was a lot of medical things going on. Certainly in those early days when she was being cooled, it was lovely just to have that little sense of normality, and to feel proud as a parent as well. And this is us now. So some more recent pictures of Heidi. It needs updating a little bit because she's now 7. She does have a long list of medical extras, but she is amazing. And that really is thanks to the care that we received, the technology in terms of cooling. Heidi is here. And yeah, on paper, her injury is severe. She's got a long list of extras. She's got cerebral palsy, tracheostomy, she's fully tube fed, she has visual and hearing impairments. It's a long list, but she is a very happy little girl and she's really loved. And I always say, if we could have seen a snapshot of what life would be like at this point when we were sat around the in the unit when Heidi was being cooled, I would have realised that we're okay, and I'd have taken it and I'd have been so relieved. I think our okay is very different to how we'd planned it, but we've found our way to be okay, and for that we'll always be very thankful. Thank you.